Hi, in this video, I'm going to introduce the evidence-based management decision-making workflow. So this is an overarching schema that we use for describing how we recommend going about making decisions and implementing them using an evidence-based approach. And it takes its inspiration from evidence-based medicine. So we've just looked in the previous video at some examples where evidence was collated by the Cochrane Centre and others to assist doctors in making decisions about the type of treatment for patients with particular symptoms or illnesses. That's a very common thing that doctors have to do all the time. The idea has been carried over to management. Things are a bit different with management, so the kinds of evidence available perhaps are not necessarily different, but the amounts available and the quality are rather different. So in management, there's probably less high quality scientific research. There's plenty of it, but probably far less. A lot of the management research is probably less applied in nature. It has less directly applicable findings. And the kinds of decision makers we're talking about are quite different. So doctors tend to work in, and medical staff tend to work in highly regulated frameworks and often in highly regulated institutions like hospitals. So implementing an evidence-based culture and a set of evidence-based practices, while not easy, in fact, it turned out to be quite difficult, it's probably a lot easier than doing it for management, where managers tend to have a lot more discretion, tend to have perhaps stronger beliefs in their intuitions and judgment. And indeed are probably in many cases considerably less interested in what science has to say. So the evidence-based framework has the 6 phases that we call the 6 A's of EBM, and they really divide into 3 sections. So the first section is the first 4 of them here: ask, acquire, appraise, and aggregate. And that's actually what we'll mainly focus on in this course. Okay, that's the stuff that I'm hoping you will emerge equipped to do well. The 5th one, apply, that's actually about implementing decisions. And that really goes to things like change management and project management. And they are subjects that you can study at ANU, you can study them in the Bachelor of Business Administration, or you can take them as electives in other courses. But I'm going to say very little about that in this course. I'll give you a quick overview, but that's really something for later. The last one here, assess. This is something that really, most of the time, we call it evaluation. It's called assess here so that we had 6 A's, not 5 A's and an E. But the idea of this is that having made your decision and implemented it and carried it out, you then evaluate or assess how successful it was. How good was your decision? How good was your implementation? Now, 2 things about this. The first thing is a really key idea is that we try, when we're implementing the decision, when we're implementing a project or a change management program, we try to devise ahead and build in some mechanism for collecting data that will enable us to make a good assessment afterwards. That's a very important principle. What happens very often, and I see this all the time in my consulting work with government, is a decision has been made to implement a program or a project. The project is carried out, and then the data is not there to really evaluate how well it went. you can't always go back in time and collect it. Okay, it's much better to plan it from the beginning. The second thing about this is that the sort of tools and your techniques you use for assessment are really things that we learn about when we cover these first 4: ask, acquire, appraise, and aggregate. So there's not actually a lot at the introductory level that's new in this assessment phase. So I won't actually have to spend very much time talking about it in the course. I might give some examples and so on. So let's look at some of the detail here. We'll start with asking the right question. This is quite a bit harder than you might think sometimes. One way to think about it is that the kinds of questions that can be answered with evidence, particularly in a business context, they generally come down to one of two things. We're either looking for a measurement of something, or we want evidence about some kind of causal relationship that we believe exists or believe doesn't exist. So measurements could be things like, the question might be, what's the average age of my customers? That's a question where you could, there are various ways you could do that. You might have to do a survey. You might have some data in your computer systems that you can pull out to help you get the answer to that. And we'll be looking at some techniques you can use during the course. That's fairly straightforward. Most of the time, I'd have to say that even when we're talking about measurements, we're probably really interested in causal relationships. So, your question initially might be, what's the average age of my customers? But what you're really going to be interested in is, could I be more profitable if I had older customers or younger customers? And that's really falls into this second category here. So there your question might be more like, which age groups among my customers are the most profitable or the most loyal or the most open to trying new products? Those are claims about causal relationships. So most of the time, it's causal relationships here. So once we've got the question, then we have to get the evidence. And there's lots of different ways you can do that. And we'll be looking at some of them. We will, as I think you know by now, be spending some time, pretty much every tutorial, looking at how you acquire scientific evidence, mainly in the form of published academic journal articles. But we will also touch on how you can collect your own data and do some simple but useful analyses of it. We'll be talking a bit about some of the issues around getting organizational data from IT systems and so on. And we'll talk a bit about what are called field experiments. So these are experiments that you can do in an organization to test things. This is something it's not all that hard to do often, and I think it's quite underutilized in most businesses. Now, we then get to quite a tricky thing. This is number 3. So this is appraising evidence. So let's say you found a journal article. And what you're interested in is, how trustworthy is it? How much weight should I give to this journal article in drawing conclusions about, say, the causal relationship that I'm interested in? So the one we're going to be looking at a journal article next week, and it's about noisy open plan offices and stress. And it's about a claimed causal relationship between noisy open plan offices and stress levels. But the problem is that you'll get some journal articles like that are the results of really carefully designed, beautiful experiments, and they've got a high level of trustworthiness, and they're about the subjects are the sorts of people that might be, working in your organization, so they're very relevant to a decision you might want to make about refurbishing your offices. But you'll get other journal articles where the quality is pretty poor. There's issues about how the data was collected, and maybe it's done in an environment or a context which is very different to the one where you're looking at actually applying it. So appraisal is difficult, and as I said on Monday in this course, we're kind of starting you on on the path to getting better at it. But it takes a very long time to become a real expert at that. Then the next one is aggregation. So one of the things we really push in evidence-based management is the idea that you should get as much good quality evidence as you can when you make a decision. Now, what we mean by that is as much good quality evidence as you can afford to spend time and money getting, given the importance of the decision. And the reason we do that is because many decisions are made on the basis of very poor evidence, very little evidence, when it actually wouldn't be terribly hard to do a lot better. Now, the fifth step here is making a decision. Now, one way you can do this with the Bayesian updating idea, which is the thing we use for aggregation. I'm not going to go into that here. You can use that. There is a calculation you can do, and we will learn that. But there are other tools that we use, and the most common one probably is this thing called multi-criteria decision making, and that's what we'll be learning over the next 4 weeks. And we'll be learning a particularly sophisticated version of it called the analytic hierarchy process. Then we get to application, which I've already talked about. And the main thing we want to emphasize there is that when you apply it, you build in an evaluation framework. So you know you're going to evaluate it afterwards. You've worked out what you would do to evaluate it, so you know what, say, data you need to collect to be able to do that afterwards. And then finally, we do the evaluation. And hopefully we learn from the evaluation, from the assessment, and we somehow store that knowledge in the organization so that if we have to do something similar in the future, we've got something we can look at that will guide us. And some organizations are really good at doing that, and many of them are terrible. All right, so that's it for the moment on evidence-based management. We will come back to bits of this as we go through the course, but just think of this as a kind of guiding framework that you need to know about. Thank you.